Hi, and welcome to this very special episode. I am Sara Gonzales, host of the news and why it matters. If you haven't already checked it out, make sure to catch the Blaze TV special I did with fellow Blaze TV hosts Steve Deace and Daniel Horowitz. It is called Uncensored: The Fatal Truth About COVID Vaccines, and it is available exclusively on Blaze TV. For obvious reasons, you don't want to miss it. The special featured some portions of my interview with world-renowned cardiologist and epidemiologist Dr. Peter McCullough, who, as I'm sure you all know, has been a beacon of truth and rationality during the COVID craze of the past 2 years. But there was so much more in the interview we didn't get a chance to show you. I wanted you to have access to all of Dr. McCullough's insight and analysis, as this truly is a life or death issue. So I present to you my full, uncensored conversation with Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough, you announced just recently that you and Robert Malone, Dr. Robert Malone, are suing Twitter. Tell me about that. Is this over censorship? What is this lawsuit about?
It's breach of contract. Twitter is a common carrier. It's no different than any other communications company. It doesn't have the right to cancel contracts without forms of justification, or certainly without due process. Mm-hmm. People on Twitter know that they can just get a notice saying that their account has been suspended and then canceled. That's illegal, and they're going to go to court.
So which account did they do that to for you?
For me, I had a account that had a non-personal name. It was called COVID-19 Treatments. And through the course of the pandemic, that was suspended several times. It was actually permanently deactivated, and then in an unusual series of events, it became alive again, and then finally killed without any explanation at all. And so Twitter it's pretty clear. Twitter is exercising censorship programs. Twitter is actually trying to change the information that the users are seeing, and it doesn't have anything to do with things that are acts of moral turpitude or nudity or violence. They're actually trying to change messaging to the public. It should be very concerning to everybody.
So I assume it was medical misinformation that they flagged you on.
It was posting peer-reviewed, published information. So, they don't have a license on medical information. There's always two points of view. There's manuscripts published. In my field, we publish manuscripts. I've published over 700 manuscripts, about 670 manuscripts to be exact. And so I'm one of the most published people in the world in history. When I render an opinion on a manuscript, that's my opinion. It's not subject to Twitter censorship.
You talked about peer-reviewed studies. There was actually a peer-reviewed study that evaluated the impact of these COVID-19 injections on sperm motility and concentration. I'm sure you saw it. It found that 3 months after vaccination, semen concentration was reduced by 15.4%. You couple that with all of the reports that COVID-19 is causing irregularities in, menstrual cycles, delayed menstruation, early menopause. I've heard these accounts from my son's doctor, who is seeing these women who are coming in who are like 7 years post-menopause, and all of a sudden they're bleeding again. What do you make of this? We're seeing low birth rates in Taiwan and Germany coinciding with when they started vaccinating their citizens. What can we make of all of these things happening?
In the summer of 2020, I published an op-ed in The Hill, and the title of the op-ed, this is before the vaccines came to market, the title of it was "The Great Gamble of the COVID-19 Vaccine Development Program." And I said it's a gamble because the vaccines are the genetic code for the Wuhan spike protein, which was devised and manipulated in a biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China, that we're going to take the code for the dangerous part of the virus and then install it in human bodies with serial injections every 6 months. It sounds like a bad idea. It is a bad idea. We know that loaded on lipid nanoparticles, this dangerous genetic code and spike protein go everywhere in the body. All the autopsy studies have shown it's in the brain, it's in the heart, it's in the bone marrow, it's in the reproductive organs. And then we have this report that just dropped demonstrating reductions in not only absolute sperm count and motility. Now, here's a way to interpret this. There's a range of sperm count and motility, those men who are at the lower range, clearly with vaccination, they're going to be brought into the infertile range. And it takes months and months and months to recover. So just by the time they recover, they take a mandated booster, they go back into the infertile range. I can tell you as a medical doctor, every man should be concerned. Every young man who's trying to conceive with a woman ought to be enormously concerned.
Do you think that women should be concerned as well? Because, as you mentioned, the nanoparticles, the lipid nanoparticles, are being found in the ovaries as well. So should women be concerned too? Women
should be more concerned for the following reasons. In a paper released from China in 2018, they had described the lipid nanoparticles definitely concentrating in ovaries. Now, this was known before the vaccines were released. So the manufacturers who loaded the messenger RNA and lipid nanoparticles, keep in mind, these are the first vaccines that are loaded on particles that go everywhere in the body. We don't want vaccines to go everywhere in the body. We want them to stay in the arm. So with a Freedom of Information Act, the Japanese authorities released a biodistribution study from Pfizer, and the Japanese asked Pfizer, they said, where do these lipid nanoparticles go? And they did the study in animals, and they showed they concentrated in the mammalian female ovary. Now, importantly, female ovaries have a set number of eggs from birth. So as the genetic code is installed into ovarian cells and the spike protein is produced in the ovary, not only is it triggering irregularities in menses, but almost certainly is causing death and destruction of those precious ovarian cells, those eggs. Eggs are being destroyed. And so on a more probable than not basis, one would conclude with serial injections every 6 months, women could be rendered infertile.
The CDC just used misleading data to recommend the COVID vaccine for children. And I'm not just saying older children. We're talking about 6 months of age, through 5, and then they've already got the approval for 5 and up. So it ranked cumulative COVID-19 deaths alongside annual rates for other causes of death, and it conflated deaths caused directly by COVID-19 rather than, they just had it as a contributing factor. And look, you're talking about this vaccine. You're talking about how much they knew, how much damage they knew that it did before they even released it to market to adults. Now we're talking about giving it to infants. Should a parent ever consider giving this vaccine to their child?
Under no circumstances should children receive the genetic code for the Wuhan spike protein. It sounds bad. It is bad. This is what we know. In the adult population, it's turned out to be a catastrophe. On June 11th, the World Council for Health, which represents over 70 non-governmental organizations worldwide, put out a recall on these vaccines. Worldwide, the safety databases, so that's the U.S. CDC VAERS system, Yellow Card, UDRA, and the WHO VigiSafe, together they're reporting 40,000 people have died within a few days of taking the vaccine. 40,000. Typically, a handful of products get off the market. We know from a Freedom of Information Act request that Pfizer knew about 1,223 deaths within 90 days of release of their vaccine. And the FDA tried to block that document to Americans for 55 years. So the FDA, Pfizer, the CDC is complicit in what's considered now large-scale fraud. For children, our CDC told us in February 75% of kids have already been through it. Probably now, with the tail of the Omicron, is far over 80%. That's the first point. The second point is that in children is characteristically a mild illness, so it's not medically necessary or it's clinically indicated. The randomized trials demonstrated no clinical benefit to children, meaning there was no reductions in risks of hospitalization and death. The registrational trials by Frank and Walther, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, they actually showed the kids got sicker with the vaccines than they would with COVID. There's more fever, more side effects. In a paper by House and colleagues, MMWR, December 31st, 2021 issue, alarmingly, the parents were reporting what happened to the children through the VSafe system, and parents reported the children were becoming incapacitated with getting this vaccine. They couldn't go to school. They were very, very sick. Now in the spring, we actually have had some real-world data come forward by Dora Bawilla and Fleming Dutra in JAMA, showing that even when children do take the vaccines, there is essentially negligible vaccine efficacy. It's far less than 50%. There hasn't been a single person at the FDA or CDC who summarized the data as I did with citing the papers. We are basically in a free fall of regulatory incompetency, malfeasance, and wrongdoing. There is willful blindness to the safety events that are happening right now, willful blindness to calls for recall, and now the children are in the crosshairs. Patients should take every measure to protect their children.
So you think that it's just incompetency and that's it? Because I look at these government agencies and I'm like, based on what we're seeing, just what we've seen since the vaccine has been released, isn't that enough to give them some hesitation before they recommend it to children, knowing that, hey, we're the FDA, we're the CDC. If we recommend something to these parents, they're going to do it. And it feels like, could it possibly be that they really are that incompetent and that's it?
Scott Atlas believes so. Scott was in the White House. He met with the CDC leaders and other leaders on a regular basis under the Trump administration. And in his book, he describes gross incompetence, that these officials would show up to meetings. It's obvious they hadn't read the data. They haven't analyzed studies. You know, I'm a frequent contributor on Fox and Newsmax and OAN. I've been on ABC. And for this interview, I prepare. I know the citations. I know the science. You never see any of our government officials display that degree of competence. You never see that. So I think Scott is right. Part of it is incompetence. I think a large part of it, though, is willful blindness. And here's the reason why. The FDA is supposed to be a safety watchdog regulatory unit.
Right.
And the CDC is supposed to be an outbreak investigation kind of data analytic unit. The CDC and FDA are actually running the clinical program. They never run clinical programs. The CDC and FDA have been told, get a needle in every arm at all costs. The FDA is showing no intent of safeguarding Americans on any injuries, disabilities, or deaths with the vaccine. None. They've expressed no interest in safeguarding Americans. And the CDC has expressed no interest in complete loss of efficacy of the vaccine. So we have two regulatory agencies that now are off the rails leading the program. There's no critical event committee. There's no data safety monitoring board. There is no human ethics committee. And a Freedom of Information Act request that came back from the CDC, posted by Senator Ron Johnson, the CDC was actually going to be regularly reviewing safety data. They still have yet to issue a report. We're 18 months into the program, and the CDC has provided no analysis on the large numbers of deaths, hospitalizations, injuries, and disabilities resulting from the vaccine.
Now that you know what you just said, now that you know all of this information, in hindsight, does it make you look back and wonder how long they've been doing this with other vaccines as well?
I never question other vaccines. I personally have taken all the other vaccines on the schedule. My children have. I had great trust in the vaccine manufacturers, the principle of vaccination to protect against illnesses. I'll give you a personal example. I'm an internist and cardiologist. I've had needle stick injuries over the course of my career. I was excited to get the hepatitis B vaccine. I was excited to be protected against hepatitis B. But with these novel genetic vaccines, which from the start seemed like a terrible idea, for an illness which ranges from a drippy nose in young people to a fatal form of a thrombotic inflammatory pneumonia in a senior citizen, my thought on this from the very beginning is if high-risk experimental vaccines were going to be used, it should have been very limited, should have been potentially just in seniors, nursing home workers, people at very high risk, and it should have been done under the strictest safety conditions. And if done so, I think these would have been pulled off the market by February 1st of 2021. We would have had excess deaths that exceeded all clinical trials, all regulatory boundaries for death, and we would have pulled them off the market, similar to how the swine flu vaccine was pulled off the market. It should have been the same series of events.
It almost feels like they just don't want a control group at this point. They don't want anyone to not take the vaccine so that we can't know what the actual side effects and long-term consequences are.
Well, people keep asking what's the real intent.
Yeah.
At this point in time, under sworn testimony Monday in the Texas Senate, I was the final witness to testify, but others testified as well. And what came out in the testimony is it almost seems as if the vaccine program actually isn't about COVID. it seems like it's about something else. So if the vaccines don't work, it doesn't matter. Here, keep taking more.
Right.
If the vaccines aren't safe, it doesn't matter. Here, force it on your employees. What if the employees die? Well, it doesn't matter. Just continue to force it on them. I mean, things now seem completely out of control. Employers should care that their employees are not injured, disabled, or die. The employers should care. They don't seem to care. We actually had a officer of one of the major health systems in Texas testify, and he was proud to have so many of his workers vaccinated. It almost seemed like he didn't care what happened to them.
Yeah. So myocarditis, I know this is your specialty here. Myocarditis has been something that's frequently discussed when it comes to this vaccine. You know, I hear a lot of doctors out there that, you know, they'll put on CNN or MSNBC will say, you know, these are just mild cases. They're just temporary. It's not a life or death situation. Is it really as simple and casual as these mainstream media doctors make it out to be?
Well, you're in my wheelhouse now.
Yeah.
I'm a cardiologist, right?
I know. I saw you
I can tell you that the principles of cardiology is we preserve heart tissue at all measures.
Yeah.
If someone is having a heart attack, we put in a stent, we open up blood flow, we give medications to protect against heart attacks. We don't allow one heart cell to be damaged. So this idea that we can normalize this, oh, it's mild here, just take some heart damage and you'll be okay. This is, I think, symptomatic of a disturbia. You know, these cardiologists who are not alarmed by this, 2 papers by Jenna Schauer, published in the journal Pediatrics, show the heart damage occurring in children who are getting myocarditis, and it's actually the peak age is men age 18 to 24. It's actually 90% men. It extends to men all the way up into their 70s, by the way. But these people, generally young, who are sustaining heart damage, it's a sizable amount of heart damage by MRI, and we evaluate that with late gadolinium enhancement. And number 2, it's not going away. So I have now some young people in my practice is over a year, and they have ongoing heart damage, and they have ongoing symptoms. It's not going away, and it makes sense it doesn't go away because the genetic code is installed to produce the spike protein. A paper by Rolkin and colleagues from Stanford in Cell showed the messenger RNA doesn't get out of the body. It's in the body for months. And work by Bruce Patterson at Incell DX shows the spike protein, which is produced by the genetic code, that stays in the body for over a year. So now people who are taking these vaccines have long-lasting genetic code and long-lasting injurious spike protein that provides ongoing injury to the heart. So there's no way that we can say it's transient, because we don't know.
Right.
There's no way we can say it's mild, because we haven't seen the full evolution of this. And there's no way that we can say it's reversible, because the data by Schauer and clinical observations suggest it's not. And then now we have fatal cases published in the literature. Gill and colleagues published from Connecticut, 2 young boys, they're teenagers. They take Pfizer on days 3 and 4. They're found dead by their parents at home. They don't even have a chance to have CPR. The parents wisely get autopsies. Wisely, the Connecticut coroner interprets the data, gets University of Michigan and University of Minnesota pathologists involved, publishes a paper in one of the best pathology journals. Conclusions: the vaccines caused fatal myocarditis. We have a paper from Choi in South Korea and one from Verma in New England Journal from Washington University of St. Louis. It's clear now. The vaccines cause fatal myocarditis. So now when we see large numbers of athletes dying on the field in these mandated programs that have been on these European teams, and now we hear about U.S. athletes dying. There was a Baltimore Raven who died recently. We've had former Dallas Cowboy running back Marion Barber. We've had Democratic Representative Sean Casten. This is tragic. He's tweeting out proudly that he's going to vaccinate his young girls, a 12-year-old and 17-year-old daughter. He's going to vaccinate his family. And now he tweets out within the last month his 17-year-old daughter found dead in her sleep. Now, I can tell you as a doctor, children can die, but the usual obituary is they've had a long battle with cancer, like leukemia, or they've had a known heart condition and they died of it, or they've had a heart transplant, or they've been in a fatal car accident. but not healthy, ostensibly healthy young girls dying at age 17 in their bed. There's a new name for this. It's called sudden adult death syndrome, SADS, where people suddenly die. And there's never a mention of the vaccines. Two things you notice. There's never a mention of the vaccine. In Kasten's case, we knew they took it.
Right.
By the way, Hank Aaron, he was one of the first ones to die. We knew he took it and died a few weeks later, ostensibly senior, but essentially healthy. So in some cases, we knew they took it. But the predominance of the other cases, they never say they didn't take the vaccine, number one. And number two, there's never any outrage. There's typically some type of statement such as, well, we need to enjoy life while we have it, something like that. And it's like, really? Is that kind of a normal emotional reaction from a parent who's lost a 17-year-old daughter? This is indicative of what we call mass formation. This is mass formation psychosis. People like Kasten are not thinking correctly.
So some skeptics would say, they would listen to you and they would say, well, we do also know, you tell me if I'm wrong because you're the doctor, not me, right? But we also know that the actual virus causes inflammation. So how do we know that that this myocarditis, this inflammation, all of these problems, that it's caused by the vaccine and not just them getting the virus?
Well, we have a Venn diagram, which is quite interesting. We have over half the country has already had the virus. Right. We had testimony in the Texas Senate, by the way, by the dean of the School of Public Health in Houston, who reported that we have 99% of people in Texas have antibodies to SARS-CoV-2. So the exposure to SARS-CoV-2 is ubiquitous. But we've had half or more of the country that have had it. And we've had 82% of people take a vaccine. Okay. The vaccine causes fatal syndromes that are published. What we have with the virus, so we have very little virus and no vaccine now because the CDC has encouraged people, even if it's too late for a vaccine, to take one anyway. So many people have actually had the virus, but they've taken the vaccine anyway. It's like, wait a minute, the vaccine is supposed to prevent it. Right. So we have everybody piled up with all this vaccine exposure. So the smoking gun is probably the vaccine because it's a genetic code. We know it's long-lasting, and the spike protein amounts are so much greater than the respiratory illness, but you can look before the vaccine. So we had an era of time before the vaccine. Right. We didn't have this sudden adult death syndrome. It didn't exist. Second observation is there were studies to look for myocarditis with the respiratory infection without having any vaccines. They were done in NCAA athletes. They were done in the military. Can't find it. There were one or two cases that maybe there was some evidence. There are elevations of troponin, a blood test for myocarditis and heart injury that we see in sick hospitalized patients, but we see that with pneumococcal and other forms of pneumonia. So it's not specific to SARS-CoV-2, and it triggers ICD codes. So there are fraudulent claims that the virus causes more myocarditis than the vaccines, but it's not scientifically tractable, and it's certainly not believable now that 82% of Americans have been duped into taking one or more of these shots.
Yeah. So Senator Ron Johnson just recently told Tucker Carlson, and I've heard this for a while, but that the Pfizer vaccine that they are currently using in the United States is not actually FDA approved. He said that it was the vaccine that was legally approved is branded as Comirnaty. It's legally distinct from Pfizer's jab that still to this day remains under, the EUA in the United States. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I've reviewed the regulatory documents carefully. The FDA actually has a misleading and false statement on its website. Really? The FDA website says that these vaccines, actually now both Pfizer and Moderna, they say they're FDA approved. But really what's happened is they've been granted biological licensing agreements, BLAs. And a BLA, and you can go on the website and read it, it says, listen, you can proceed with FDA approval, but you must commit to post-marketing studies, that there must be special language regarding pregnancy, and there must be an approved package insert. And then actually Pfizer and Moderna could actually advertise for vaccines. So you know that they haven't done all that because there's no Pfizer and Moderna advertising. there's no package insert. So the next person who goes take a vaccine, they're not handed an approved package insert. The consent form hasn't changed. So every single American who's still taking the vaccines, it says it's under emergency use authorization. We don't know if it's going to work or not. It's a clinical investigation. It's essentially research. So even the military has fraudulently put this forward and saying, well, it's approved. But the military are signing these consents that say it's EUA and it's not FDA approved. So FDA approval is something very tangible. Everyone will know it because insurance companies will buy the products and you have to get approval. You'll buy and sell them. You'll get a full package insert when you sign. And the consent form will tell you that. So they haven't made it through the full FDA approval process. The FDA has, I think, falsely represented the meetings that happened. And this went all the way up to President Biden. President Biden last summer got on TV saying they're FDA approved, and they weren't.
Wow. So under the EUA, tell me if I have this right, under the EUA, it shields the pharmaceutical companies from any sort of liability if any sort of negative, adverse reaction happens. Do I have that right?
There are so many layers of protection now for the vaccine manufacturers and for those carrying out the program, the CDC, the FDA, the people giving the vaccines. And they include parts of the PrEP Act, of parts of the 1986 vaccine indemnification law, the EUA. There is such broad sets of protections now that when people are injured, Senator Johnson has actually, proposed compensation funds outside the United States. Canada and other places have tried to come up with these funds as large numbers of people are being injured, disabled, and of dying. I think we should look carefully at the disabilities. Our CDC has confirmed with permanent VAERS numbers that over 13,000 Americans now are permanently disabled from COVID-19 vaccination. Out of my clinic, I've had to report them as people become damaged and disabled.
So all that being said, how has your view of the healthcare system, of the pharmaceutical companies, how has your view of all of these systems changed in the last 2.5 years that you've been seeing what you're seeing?
It's not just me. In Senate testimony on Monday, June 27th, in the Texas Senate Department of Health and Human Services, multiple presenters from Texas public health agencies said, quote, they've lost their trust in the CDC. That we've lost our trust in our regulatory agencies. They have not behaved in our best interests. They haven't protected Americans. We knew by January 22nd there was excess mortality with these vaccines. There should have been an immediate mortality review. People who are being injured and damaged or died, there should have been calls put out. Find out what happened. Tell us the circumstances. The vaccines, when they came out, Americans saw that they had to be super cool. They needed special provisions. The randomized trials typically is 1 vial of placebo or 1 vial of active substance. Is very carefully managed. When they got into the public use program, we didn't hear so much about super cooling. It went to multi-use vials, so the nurses are poking needles. These lipid nanoparticles are very fragile. The messenger RNA is very fragile. There are some data suggesting the injuries and damage and deaths are related to certain lots. We know that both Pfizer and Moderna have had large returns of lots because of contaminants and precipitants, metal contaminants. So good clinical manufacturing is not being followed. The vaccines look bad as they're received by various countries. And there are many reasons to think that from the original registrational trials now to the public program, something's gone wrong, and indeed it has.
How did you go from one of the most respected cardiologists in American history to what seems to be, being smeared as like the greatest supervillain ever when it comes to COVID misinformation?
Yeah, I never anticipated this could possibly happen. I'm the most published person in my field in the world in history. I had devised a hypothesis that was fully explored over the last several decades, that the heart and kidneys communicate with each other. They influence each other in health and disease. And that became basically a very tractable line of investigation that led to in vitro diagnostics and therapeutics, since there are common intermediaries like diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. And because of that, I was the editor of 2 major journals, Cardiorenal Medicine, Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. I was a frequent lecturer all over the world. 2018, I was the named endowed lecturer at Harvard. I lectured in 2 different major departments. I've lectured at the New York Academy of Sciences. I presented at the European Medicine Association. I've presented at the FDA Congressional Oversight Panel. I mean, I've done a lot in my career to be perfectly credible as an analyst. I've actually chaired data safety monitoring boards for over 24 trials. There may be no other physician with an MD behind their name who's actually done that in the United States. I know product safety inside out, backwards, and forwards. So when COVID-19 hit, it was so clear to me that if we didn't treat it early, that the virus was going to slaughter our senior citizens, and I was not going to let that happen on my watch. I worked feverishly. I got large grants. I got investigation and drug application with the FDA. I was an overall named principal investigator on some other large programs, and I worked with others, and we devised a treatment approach, and literally within 6 months, we had a home treatment guide. I had major papers published on this, and the degree of censorship that I started to receive on early treatment before the vaccines made me believe that those who were actually actively suppressing treatment were doing so in order to ultimately promote the vaccines. They were ready for this. So if we look at those who are most actively suppressing early treatment, NIH, CDC, and FDA, the American Medical Association, all the major medical colleges, they are the same ones who are in an unbridled fashion promoting the vaccines. And the first time I told Tucker Carlson that on his long program last year, I said, Tucker, I think the two are linked. I think they're actually intentionally promoting fear, suffering, hospitalization, and death in order to prepare the population to accept these vaccines.
So I have one last question for you, and I want you, obviously, the smart person in the room is you, okay? So I want you to be brutally honest with me. Just for reference, I don't vaccinate my children, okay? I haven't. How crazy do you think I am now in 2022 for making that decision because I don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, I don't trust the studies, I don't trust the government's incestuous relationship with them? How crazy would you have thought that I was in 2019 compared to how crazy you think I am now?
You know, I've never thought it's crazy because, you know, there's Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't take blood transfusions.
Right.
So, you know, we encounter situations. But what I would do is I would express my full recognition of your autonomy as a parent. You actually have the autonomy to make these decisions. What I learned afterwards, and I interviewed with him on the McCullough Report, America Out Loud Talk Radio, the McCullough Report, is I interviewed Paul Thomas. Paul's a pediatrician. And Paul said, you know, I'm just going to let parents decide like you.
Right.
Paul actually lost his license because he let parents decide based on risks and benefits if they wanted these vaccines. And then what Paul did, because he lost his license, he studied this. And he looked at children who had taken the full vaccine schedule, a large number of them, those like your children who deferred, and it was night and day in terms of autoimmune diseases, neuropsychiatric diseases like Asperger's disease, attention deficit disorder, on and on and on. So those data, I think, to this day give us pause that potentially vaccination has gotten out of control. I mean, one example is giving a brand new newborn a hepatitis B vaccine. The baby's immune system is trying to adapt, and they have to get hit with a depot of hepatitis B surface antigen. I mean, these things, you know, are beyond the pale. With over 70 vaccines on the vaccine schedule. When I was a child growing up, it was just a handful.
Right.
But we've learned, since this time, we've learned to take a critical look at vaccines quickly. Last year, influenza vaccine, 16% vaccine efficacy, basically useless. Yeah. Recently, the 13-valent pneumococcal vaccine, which I heavily promoted because I was told to in my medicine practice, published in JAMA, vaccine efficacy against pneumococcal hospitalization or death, 9%. These vaccines against respiratory illnesses are basically useless.
That's it for us. I really, really appreciate all of your efforts, not just, you know, this interview here, but all of your efforts, all of your insistence that your patients get treated. I followed your treatment plan when I got COVID, and my whole family did. And I just appreciate so much all of your hard work and all of your insistence that the country receives the actual truth.
Thank you.